Welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of college basketball. Not a pretty win, but a win nonetheless against a scrappy Oregon team. There wasn't a lot of great basketball to be seen, but the Boilers will take the win nonetheless. But without further ado, let's run it. This game ends in a final score of Purdue 68, Oregon 64. It was an ugly, low-scoring game, quite the turnover fest. Certainly not the way that Purdue wanted to handle this game against a bottom Big Ten opponent before heading into a very tough stretch of games. But we'll start talking about the Oregon side of things. It really was the Nate Biddle and Takai Simkins show. They made up 37 of their team's 64 points. Neither of them shot super efficiently. I guess they were both around, 50% from the floor, so neither one of them had a super major efficient game, but they were their offense. I mean, that's more than half of their points, and nobody other than those two really got going for their team. But Purdue struggled to stop them nonetheless. For Oregon, they really have been struggling lately, mainly with a lot of the injuries that they've had. This was, I believe, Nate Biddle's first game back in multiple games, and Jackson Shelstad has been out for the majority of the season. I'm not exactly sure what his injury history actually is, or what's the reason for him being out for so much of the season, but that's been a big portion of their struggles. And having him back in this game was a game changer for them. Nate Biddle has given us fits in the past. He gave us some fits in this one, even if the rest of the team didn't necessarily hold up their end of the bargain. But as a team, they did not shoot the ball well. They were 24 of 54 for 44%. They were 5 of 25, just 20% from three, and 11 for 16 from the free throw line, 69%. So they certainly would have liked a couple of those points that they left at the free throw line, but the vast majority of those free throws were Nate Biddle. He was 10 for 14 from the line himself, so only Kwame Evans Jr. got to the free throw line towards the end of the game there and was 1 for 2. So it really was just Biddle finding ways to get to the free throw line and really being the sole form of offense for them. But the big thing for them was the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, holding Purdue to 68 points is impressive in its own right, even more impressive to do in Mackey Arena. But the way that they did it, they completely threw off Purdue's offense. It wasn't just the fact that Purdue, wasn't hitting shots, or that we got everything we wanted and things weren't falling. They had 12 steals. Their hands were in the passing lanes all night, and it made for very uncomfortable offense for Purdue, despite a couple of guys still having, some pretty good offensive success. 12 steals is rather astonishing for a team for Purdue that turns the ball over only like 9 to 10 times per game. Um, Not only forcing them into double-digit turnovers, but having 12 of them as steals, live ball turnovers, not common for Purdue. And honestly, I don't think very common for Oregon. I don't think they're particularly known for being, defensive master classes, or masters by any means as a team or individual players for that matter. And it really wasn't an individual performance for a whole lot of it. I mean, for their steals, they had Sean Stewart with 3, Kwame Evans with Jr. with 2, Takai Simkins with 4, and 3 guys on their bench each had 1 each. So it really was a team effort and overall a pretty solid game plan by Dana Altman, all things considered, to make this a very competitive game. But for Oregon, it's like you expect, at least for the offensive side, you expect them to be bad. They were an 8-14 team, 1-10 in conference play coming into this game, losers of their last 8 games, and they were coming into Mackey Arena off of a dominant win for Purdue at Maryland. This should have been the turnaround. That last game should have been the turnaround point for Purdue, and you keep that momentum going heading into a very tough stretch of games for them before we get into March in the Big Ten tournament. That's just not how it went. They came in with a different fire, and when Purdue struggled to get things going on the offensive end, at least consistently, especially when it comes to the turnovers, we just never really found our footing. In terms of the game flow, we held a lead, albeit not a big one for most of the first half, but only snuck into halftime with a 2-point lead. There were quite a few ties during that stretch, but Oregon did not ever take the lead in that first half. They didn't take the lead until the second half. But to start the second half, we built and kept like a 5 to 7 point lead. I thought that, by that point, it's like, okay, we handled the first half, weirdness and got a few more shots to fall, got a bit more comfortable that maybe we'd be able to hold that lead and then kind of slowly continue to extend it to make this just a general comfortable game. That just was not the case. Over the course of like the sort of 10 to 5 minute mark of the second half, Oregon just kind of chipped their way back into it, mostly once again with Nate Biddle and Takai Simpkins. Um, Oregon ended up taking their first lead since like the 7-5 mark. I think I saw the graphic with 5.5 to play, and then it's like, okay, we're really in this. We kind of lost the plot of okay, we're gonna finally lock in and pull away from this one. That was kind of out of the question at that point. Is how are we going to lock down and make winning plays down the stretch to come out with a win? And thankfully, we were able to do that. But they got up as high as a 3 point lead with 4.5 minutes to play before getting cold again. And Purdue wasn't super hot themselves, but it was TKR and Lawyer down the stretch that made some big time buckets, especially Lawyer, to help us escape with the win. You should not have to escape with a win against this Oregon team, especially not at home, but that's what it was. And the win is great, but it did not feel good watching it. I will certainly speaking for myself and probably for most Purdue fans out there, and quite frankly, even the college basketball analysts. A lot of people are still concerned with Purdue and the way we're playing and the inconsistency, the fact that we can go to Maryland and put up such a dominant performance like that against a roughly equally as bad team as Oregon, and then come back home and put up this performance, not even crack 70. But talking Purdue specifically, the big three combined for 43 of our 68 points. And the bright spot of that is especially the fact that Lawyer is continuing to showing that his shooting is back and should hopefully continue to be back. Quite frankly, I think we just didn't get him enough opportunities. He was 3 for 4 on the night from three. It was one of those performances that with him getting 18 points on just 4 of 7 shooting, 3 for 4 from three, because he got to the free throw line a fair amount. Some just based on, taking pump fakes and driving to the basket and drawing fouls. Also a couple of free throws knocked down towards the end of the game there while Oregon was trying to, fight to their last gasps. But you need to get him more shots if he's going to shoot like that. It goes both ways. When I was talking about earlier on in during Lawyer's slump, where if he's not hitting shots, don't keep going to him because he's not a guy that typically, turns himself around mid-game. But if he is making shots, we got to get him more opportunities, especially when the other avenues weren't working. If it's the fact that Lawyer had 7 shots and he had 18 points in a game where Purdue's offense is clicking and we just kind of got whatever we wanted and the ball just didn't fall into his hands that often, okay, so be it. If other things are clicking, that's great. But if his shooting and his offense is the true bright spot of the game, run more stuff for him. And we did run a fair amount of things for him, and it didn't necessarily always materialize in open threes, but got to find ways to get him more shots if he's going to be able to knock down threes with that kind of efficiency. And I think a big part of the reason we weren't able to was because of how Oregon handled the ball screens. And we'll get into that a little bit, but part of the ball screens, of course, is TKR because he was the really only threat out of the ball screens in this one. He ended up with a solid 12, 8, and 4 with only one turnover on 4 of 8 shooting. And I think, honestly, more reassuring was the fact that he was 4 for 5 from the free throw line. That's probably one of the best free throw performances that we've seen from him, at least with a somewhat amount of volume over 2 or 3 attempts. So that was good to see. And the fact that he's continuing to rebound, he was our only real efficient rebounder as well. Other than him, we had a couple of guys with 4 rebounds, but him with 8 was by far our premier rebounder in this one. And glad to see him rebounding. Still would like a bit more than just a one-headed monster from just him. But Going over to the other side, or the third part of our big three, Braden wasn't particularly efficient on offense. He had some opportunities, some of them just didn't fall. But he still got his buckets. He had 13 points on 5 of 12 shooting. He was 1 for 4 from three. That's is one of his. He's been shooting the ball so well in Big Ten play. It was kind of down the stretch that he couldn't really get much to fall. He scored a lot at the beginning. I believe he had Purdue's first 7 points. So he had 7 out of his 13 early, and then got a couple of buckets kind of down the stretch. When we kind of realized, like, hey, a lot of the ball screen stuff isn't working. We're not really getting a lot of flow on the offensive end, and he started hunting his shots a bit more. Still missed a couple doing that, but he also got a couple of big time buckets for us. So I kind of wish that he would have been a little bit more consistent with that through the game. But hindsight is 2020. We still want to run all of our stuff and assume that we are a good enough offense as one of the top efficient offenses in the country that we should be able to just, impose our will, especially against a team that really isn't like well known for defense. But that wasn't the case, and that's why he kind of went back to that down the stretch, which ended up, helping us a bit. But I think the bigger issue with his playmaking not working was the turnovers. Some of that was his decision making, and just kind of assuming that he's going to be able to get the passes through. But also a big part of that, you have to give Oregon credit. Their hands were in the passing lanes all night. Like I said, they ended up with 12 steals. For Braden specifically, only 4 assists to his 6 turnovers. And I think that might be the only game this year where he has had a negative assist to turnover ratio. There's been some games where he's had some iffy, maybe, even 4 and 4, something like that, 5 and 4. But I'm not sure if I remember a game that he had more turnovers than assists this year specifically. But it wasn't really like one guy shutting him down. It was just the fact that they did a good job getting around screens, and I guess you have to give credit to the on-ball defenders there. But they rotated really well and just made it really difficult to and kind of cutting off those pockets for Braden trying to slip that short roll into TKR or even the long roll to Clough. We had a success at least once, maybe twice, on the long roll to Jacobson for lobs there or just getting him open in the paint. But they threw him off his game, and I think it was PJ Thompson that said in the last episode of the Running Point podcast with Sleepers Media that he didn't want to give up the secrets to guarding Braden or how he would guard Braden, but he said the biggest thing is to in general against any good player, good guard, is show them different looks. And they did kind of show a lot of different looks to Braden in terms of early on, kind of letting him get his own. He got into his jump shots, both threes and pulling up in the mid range. And then as the game went on, they threw zone at Purdue, and then they also threw a lot of different ball screen coverages in terms of blitzing him, hard hedging, just kind of forcing him to fight over things like that. And it allowed Braden or kept him from getting comfortable. So I got to give him credit for that. But for a guy at the caliber of Braden Smith, you definitely hope and expect a little bit better poise necessarily handling those situations. It's one of those things where we had very limited success with certain guys, and I think I really would have liked to see a little bit more success or with Clough specifically. He was kind of an afterthought, and I'll talk about him in a little bit. But not going to be too many games that you get that kind of stat line out of Braden when it comes to the playmaking side of things. There are going to be games that shots don't fall. Not many teams are going to be able to throw him off his rhythm playmaking like that. But talking about the rest of the starting lineup, I kind of mentioned, I haven't even talked about CJ Cox yet because there literally is almost nothing to mention. I mean, again, he is a solid defender, but he did not end up with a steal in this game, and he just, quite frankly, did knock down his only shots. 2 points, 1 of 4 shooting, 0 for 3 from 3. He did have 3 rebounds, 3 assists, but 2 turnovers, and he has not turned the ball over very much this year, so it was tough to see him finally kind of get the turnover bug a bit there. But for him, very similarly to Clough, and I'll get to Jakari later, very similar to him, there's not going to be too many games where those guys are the feature of the offense. And if they don't knock down a lot of the couple of shots that they're going to get, you're going to get some ugly stat lines like this. And they just didn't look very good. I obviously just mentioned CJ's stat line, but for Clough, he played 20 minutes, 3 points, 1 of 3 shooting, 1 for 2 from the free throw line, 2 rebounds, 2 turnovers. Big thing again, and I mentioned time and time again, We'll see what it takes to get him back on track, but Oscar Clough needs to rebound better if this team is going to be successful. The team rebounding was and I think a big part of the reason is once again rebounding from the center position. Um, Jacobson had more success than Clough did, and we'll get into Jacobson here very soon. Um, but if he's not going to get those offensive opportunities, he needs to be able to affect games in winning ways other than scoring. And rebounding is supposed to be his thing. I've talked about this before. I'll say it again. Don't want to be too much of a broken record, but he's got to rebound the ball better if he's going to play half the game, and still be considered one of the premier rebounders in the sport, or supposedly, coming into the season and even at the beginning of the season, the way that he was rebounding the ball in the non-con. But heading over to the bench, Jacobson, you talk about 20 minutes from Clough, 20 minutes from Jacobson. Jacobson in this one was much more efficient. He had 9 points on a perfect 3 of 3, and he was 3 for 3 from the free throw line with 4 rebounds. The only thing is no blocks. It's another one where I would love to see a little bit of a better defensive presence from Jacobson because that's supposed to be his thing. But in general, Oregon didn't do a ton of work in the basket, at least like driving to the lane. Obviously, Nate Biddle did all of his work, or a fair amount of his work inside. Of course, he'll still shoot threes, and Biddle was 1 for 8 from three. I don't think I noticed that earlier. That isn't great, but yeah. Jacobson in general, though, this was one of his better performances for sure. There was still a time or two where I'm like, I want him to get stronger and more confident catching the ball and making a post move. Whether it be understanding where the defenders are around him if he's going to dribble, or if he just gets more comfortable getting himself set and catch, turn, shoot. He needs to continue to work out those kinks if he's going to be an effective post scorer. Until then, I would mostly still prefer him to be a big time rebounder, a big time shot blocker, and continue to work in the pick and roll game with a long roll and seeing if Braden can find him for lobs again. He found him for 1 or 2 this game. I think one at least was a successful lob. One of them was, a pass to him, collect, dunk the ball, that type of thing. And that obviously is going to allow him to be pretty efficient with his shots. But I really can't complain about his performance other than, hopefully more rebounding, hopefully getting more shot blocking. But past him, Omer Meyer wasn't a knockdown shooter. He had 4 points, 1 of 3 shooting, 0 for 2 from three, 2 for 3 from the free throw line, 2 rebounds, an assist, and a steal. So he was one where he didn't have a super big offensive presence, but kind of like I mentioned with Clough and with CJ Cox, find ways to impact winning outside of that. You'll find that to be a pretty common thing with the bench. In this game at least. Jacobson found his points, but he had some winning qualities in terms of, the rebounding. And Omer, he did well on the defensive end. He ended up with the 1 steal, but I'm continue to be more and more impressed with his development as an on-ball defender. I think a lot of the talk with Omer coming into this year is, oh, he's a traffic cone. Oh, he's not going to be able to defend at the high major level. He's just like this, up and coming offensive presence at the point guard position. He's really gotten better in on-ball defense and off-ball as well. He continues to be active. I think it's something that he has taken to heart and taken very seriously this year. And it's worked out well for him. And I'm glad that he's been able to be a more solid defensive presence than some of our guards, quite frankly. So overall, you hope that he gets a couple more shots to knock down, maybe knocks down one of those 2 threes. But he's been shooting the ball well before this game. I'm not going to be worried that he goes 0 for 2 one game. Past him, you see Benter with just 12 minutes and 5 points on 2 of 3 shooting, 1 for 2 from three. He was 0 for 1 from the free throw line with a rebound and a steal, and of course, not on the box score, a charge. This was another game where Jack Benter comes in, and regardless whether or not his offense is working and his shots are falling, or if he gets those opportunities on offense, he is going to affect games in winning ways. He's going to make winning plays. The charges are a fantastic example of that. He is a great wing defender for us against some of the more athletic wings, athletic fours, when we face teams like that, just because he could defend a lot more versatilely than TKR can. And he saw three fall in this one. He was 1 for 2 from three, which is always great to see. He had been struggling a lot lately. Hopefully, he can keep building on that if he gets more shooting opportunities going forward. And the feeling we're going to need him with some of these games coming up. But overall, very solid from him. Wish he maybe would have seen a few more minutes, but again, it's going to be weird to get him more minutes if you're still going to be playing TKR a lot. And quite frankly, he's already cutting into TKR's minutes a fair amount. The fact that you're not getting TKR 30 plus minutes. He only had 28. But end of the bench here was Jakari Harris, and this was another game where, or another player, similarly like what we talked about with CJ Cox, if he's not knocking down his shots and his opportunities, you're not going to get some great stat lines. He had played 15 minutes, just 2 points, 1 of 4 shooting, 0 for 3 from three, so he couldn't knock down any of his 3-point opportunities, a rebound, an assist, and a turnover. He was still solid on the defensive end, didn't end up with a steal in this one. So it's always going to be kind of like iffy here and there about what you see on the at least box score wise from Jakari Harris. I don't think he played horribly. I just think, if he knocks down a three or two, you talk about this performance a lot different than when you see 0 for 3 and when you're watching him on the floor, like, oh man, he missed another one, that kind of thing. But it's give or take. You're gonna have some great ones, some poor ones, and he knocked down quite a couple of shots in some of these recent games. So definitely not worried about him necessarily, but definitely could have used more offense when the rest of the guys are struggling. Heading into more of the sort of team stats, overall shooting, we didn't shoot much better than they did. We were 22 of 47, just 47%, and 5 of 18 from the three-point line, good for 28%. So we did outshoot them in both of those categories, percentage-wise, but not by much. Same goes for the free throw line as well. We got to the free throw line a lot more than we typically have in previous games. I think this kind of shows how ugly this game was. There was a lot of fouls on both sides. And there was a lot of free throws taken because of that. But we were 19 for 25, good for 76%. Really, us shooting as well as we did from the free throw line, a big part of the reason we were able to pull this out despite it being a very ugly game. So that's kind of a silver lining of this one. Not a pretty game, but down the stretch, we did enough and we did the right things to win when we found ourselves in a close game with a couple minutes left. And that's what you need to do, whether or not it was a good game leading up to that. If it's 0-0 with 2 minutes left, who wins those last 2 minutes? And in this one, we were able to win those last couple of minutes and come out on top. But the rebounding battle was another one that was interesting. Again, similar to some of the games recently, didn't win it by as much as we should have, especially against a team that also not great rebounding, not a super strong front court. Obviously, Nate Biddle is a solid center, but he wasn't even their leading rebounder, and not by even that much. He only had five rebounds. They had two guys with seven. Both Sean Stewart and Kwame Evans Jr. had 7 rebounds. But as a team, we out-rebounded them 32 to 28. Offensively, it was 8 to 7, although I had to double check this in multiple box scores. We have two sort of phantom offensive rebounds. I can find offensive rebounds listed, one for TKR, one for Clough, one for CJ Cox, one for Fletcher Lawyer, one for Meyer, and one for Benter. But there's two more that are just attributed. I'm guessing, my best guess is team offensive rebounds, where a shot goes up and it gets knocked out of bounds off of Oregon. So they give Purdue the offensive rebound, but they can't attribute it to any specific person. I have to assume that's what they meant by that. But 8 to 7 offensive rebounds. Glad that we got 8, but once again, should not be giving up 7 offensive rebounds to a team like Oregon. That's not one of the premier offensive rebounding teams like we have played here recently, like in Illinois. And on the defensive end, only 24 to 21. A lot of missed shots, so there's a fair amount of rebounds to go around. But again, with the center position not necessarily rebounding as well as I think we should, and relying a lot more on our guards to rebound. You had 4 rebounds for Braden, 4 rebounds for Fletch, even 3 for CJ Cox. Like, those guys obviously rebounded well for their position, but we shouldn't be relying on that. And I think if we rebound better and box out better, do better team rebounding, you would have seen a better balance in that margin there. But next, the turnovers, not pretty. We've talked about it a lot for a lot of individual players. We lost the turnover battle. We had 14 turnovers to their 13. But I think, again, with what I mentioned earlier on the steal side of things, it definitely fell in their their advantage given the fact that they had 12 steals to our 5. A lot more of theirs were dead ball turnovers, a lot more of ours were live ball turnovers. And one of the things that I hadn't checked that I'll go check here, points off of turnovers, it actually ended up pretty even. Purdue won that battle despite losing the turnover battle. We had 17 points off turnovers to their 15. They did have 9 fast break points to our 7. So when it comes to true fast breaks, they had a slight edge. But again, that because they had so many live ball steals, that's kind of to be expected. But yeah, the Purdue should not turn over the ball 14 times against a team like Oregon. We shouldn't turn the ball over 14 times against most teams because again, when you have a guy like Braden Smith at the helm, you expect turnovers to be limited. And this was one of his worst games for turning the ball over this season. Um, I think this will be an anomaly. I don't think this will become a common thing, but in a lot of these situations, it shows a little bit of a blueprint of what other teams might try to do to disrupt Purdue, to disrupt Braden Smith specifically. And hopefully that's not something that is able to continue, but you never know. Um, Going on next to the assists, it was very close. It was 15 to 14. Purdue, one of the premier ball movement teams or scoring off of assists. But we only ended up with 15 assists in this one and to their 14. So they had a lot of good ball movement of their own, knocking down shots off of, a lot of different actions. So that's something that is unusual to see. Usually, even if it's a close game or if other teams make a lot of shots, which neither teams did in this one, you'll still see Purdue win that assist battle by a fair amount because that's just the style of offense that we played. But we kind of let them dice us up a little bit here and there, even if the shots weren't falling. It kind of just shows that if they knock down a couple more of their shots, they got some pretty open looks across the board throughout the game. This game could have ended a lot differently. And I mentioned the free throw shooting. They went 11 for 16. We went 19 for 25. The fact that we got to the free throw line as often as we did was a good thing. They had 21 personal fouls to our 14, so that's pretty on par for us. And we do draw. Actually, we don't draw a ton of fouls necessarily because we don't get to the free throw line a ton, but we are able to force teams into some uncomfortable situations at times. And, I think that this entire game was an uncomfortable situation. So it was a big plus for us to be able to get to the free throw line as much as we did, but more importantly, knock them down. Literally, no one missed more than one free throw. All 6 free throw misses came one per person. So that's big time, especially for some of our guys that are not great free throw shooters. That was very clutch for us in this game. But moving over to some of the advanced analytics that I like looking at. One of the things that I want to obviously start off with is the box plus minus because for the first time potentially this entire season, I obviously didn't look at this early on in the season, but Braden Smith had a negative box plus minus. And that's tough to see, but I think it kind of shows that his lack of playmaking and turnovers combined really put a damper on Purdue's offensive performance. I mean, it makes sense when you have a point guard that almost all of your offense runs through and he struggles, your team's going to struggle and it shows in the blocks plus minus there. But in terms of positives, obviously Fletcher Lawyer with his shooting put up a very good performance with 18 on the box plus minus. And for TKR, he had 13.7. So both of those guys did well with their opportunities. And I think more importantly or more interestingly to highlight was the bench. 14.5 out of Jack Bender. Once again, I talked about the fact that you may not necessarily see the stats come up on the true normal box score of scoring, assists, rebounding, that kind of stuff, but he affects winning. And in his opportunities, he capitalized no matter how short they were, both offensively and defensively, and it shows. And it's one of the things that, kind of points towards the fact that, in a lot of these games, you want to try to get Jack Benner on the floor more than others. There have been the occasional game where he misses quite a few shots, and then a lot of people want to push back on that, but most times the stats speak for themselves that he is a winning player, and you want to get those guys on the floor. But as well, you got Daniel Jacobson with 13.6. He was right behind TKR in terms of that stat there. So during his 20 minutes, that was very solid to see out of him, especially on the offensive end, going perfect 3 for 3 and knocking down all of his free throws. But also you see Omer Meyer with 8.9. very solid there. Once again, not super, high scoring off the bench, but in his limited minutes, he made more winning plays than losing plays, and quite frankly, you can't necessarily say that as much for some of our offensive players. And when you look at the negative side, obviously Jakari Harris, with those missing shots and not necessarily coming up with a lot on the defensive end, he's gonna have. It's understandable to come up with a negative box plus minus there. But the starting lineup, you see Clough with negative 8.1. I think that's the biggest negative that I want to highlight outside of, Braden being in the negative for once. Um, for him playing 20 minutes and supposed to be the presence that he is, we need more out of him for sure. And it was very clear that he was not the presence that we wanted him to be. And I think Painter himself even said that Jacobson and Omer Meyer and Jack Benter probably should have seen some more time on the floor based on who was having success in this game. But another stat that I haven't looked at before that I want to look at now specifically is the offensive rating stat. And that stat specifically is described as an estimate of points scored for teams or points produced for players per 100 possessions. So once again, per 100 possessions, if you score a two every offensive possession, that's 200 points. Well, you look at some of these guys. Daniel Jacobson has our highest offensive rating, and yes, I get because perfect 3 for 3. But I think it's just something to highlight. It's interesting that when guys are playing that efficiently, maybe you try to go more in their direction with the things that they are doing efficiently. Like I said, I wasn't, super, super enthused to just traditionally post him up, but trying to work the long pick and roll with getting him to the basket. If the short pick and roll with the pick and short roll to TKR or Clough for that matter isn't working, go to that. And obviously he was great in that aspect, but kind of across the board for the bench, other than Jakari, you see those offensive ratings. Omer Meyer with 119, Jack Benter for 136. Only Lawyer and TKR put up those kind of offensive rating numbers from the starting lineup. Lawyer being the only one ahead of Omer and Benter. So it just proves that our bench was overall better than our offense. On an offensive side of things, and the bench obviously didn't get as many opportunities, but it's something to look at. It's kind of hard to make these kind of calls as the game is happening, but it's interesting to look back after the fact just to show that, if you're able to identify it during the time, might want to ride with the bench a little bit more in this one, at least with some of those guys. Maybe those guys as the accentuating pieces outside of like, yes, you're going to have Braden Smith in no matter how well or poorly he's playing playmaking wise. You're going to want him on the floor a lot. But even if you go to Omer Meyer, clearly in this game, it was, a worthwhile decision to make every once in a while, even if you're maybe playing Braden off ball instead. Um, Going over the turnover percentage, though, I don't have much to say other than look at the starters. A lot of turnovers between them. The stat itself is just an estimate of turnovers per 100 plays and just in percentage form. So you see a lot of those guys around 33%. That's tough. You want to take care of the ball a lot better than that. And in this game, it just wasn't pretty in that fashion. Whereas the bench took care of the ball a lot better in their opportunities. Um, and overall, you just kind of looking across the board. I think there's a lot to be said about those mid-game adjustments, and I think that we made some pretty solid mid-game adjustments as the game went on. And I understand that Painter doesn't want to go too far in one direction or another, just taking some of his starters out that aren't performing that well. You want to give them the opportunities because those are the guys that, they're starters for a reason. But overall, I think I'm just more pleased that the bench came in and did a lot of positives in the opportunities that they got, because that's hard to do when you don't get much time and you have to come out there and try to be a positive influence. And we're going to need that in a lot of these games against a whole lot better teams than Oregon. And speaking of, coming up next, we've got an enormous game for Big Ten title hopes as Purdue travels to Lincoln on Tuesday to take on number 7 Nebraska in what should be a very tough game. It's number 13 versus number 7, and Nebraska is a great team. even greater at home, and their fans are going to make sure it is one hell of an atmosphere. They've obviously dropped two games relatively recently with some injuries and some illnesses, making it a bit tougher for them to win some of these matchups against some of the best Big Ten teams. But I'm pretty sure they're going to be back about as close to 100%, if not 100% for this game. And it's going to be one hell of an atmosphere in Lincoln, Nebraska. If we play anywhere near like we did in this game, we will get ran out of the gym. So we will have to see. But that's all I've got for today. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for a marquee matchup in Nebraska and for so much more as we go through this month heading into March. With the Super Bowl done, it's officially college basketball's time. But if you want more from us, like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm out.